Hello and welcome to the Redeemed Man podcast. I'm Paul Amos, founder of The Redeemed. What we've built at The Redeemed is a place for men to come together, a true community that accepts men of all types who are looking to find ways for Jesus and our thoughts to come together and really make for an environment that not only embraces man's difficulties, but celebrates our triumphs in life over those difficulties. This podcast is a chance for us to really learn about other men, their journeys, and some of the wonderful things they're doing in life. Today we have a very special guest in Tommy Lee. Tommy is joining us with a really rich background as well as a wonderful ministry that he has started. And frankly, as someone myself who has a background in corporate America, I'm fascinated to hear him talk to us today about what he's doing to help men bring spirituality into the workplace and balance what is an ongoing pressure to not have that be a present part of America today and corporate America. So Tommy, welcome to the show and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
Tommy, in addition to being a wonderful guy, has not one, but two different podcasts, one on leadership and fascinatingly, one on fantasy football. So a portion of our show today is going to be all about the things you as our audience are used to. And then for all of you football fans out there, we're also going to dig just a little bit into what he knows and what he may be seeing ahead as the 2025 season comes around. And I'll definitely ask him at the end to give us one or two of those sleeper picks that he's already looking at. So Tommy, today let's just start as we often do in asking you, would you be so kind as to share just a little bit of your faith journey and kind of what's brought you to the place you are today? Obviously, there are always pillar experiences that lead to us wanting to start a ministry. And so if you wouldn't mind, just talk a little bit about your background and help our audience get a framing of what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, Paul, I was born in April 1st, 1977. My parents immigrated.
Happy birthday then.
Oh, thank you very much. My parents immigrated in 1972, and growing up in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, I was the first of 5 Asians in my neighborhood. And so in some sense, you grew up, picked on, all of that stuff for the color of your skin. My parents always emphasized education, 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 straight A's, non-negotiable. That is what you're supposed to do. But in high school, my parents loved this one teacher, our history teacher, who happened to be the elder of a church. And Paul, he says to my mom, I have a twin brother, I have an older sister, a younger sister, and he says, we encourage you to send them to youth group to church because your kids have no social skills. So literally, I went to church to learn social skills, Paul. And so that's where there was this one youth pastor who came and picked us up all the time, drove us, dropped us home, came to know the Lord during that period of time in high school, got involved with our high school youth group, went to Washington University in St. Louis, thought I was going to go into medical school and be a doctor, but got involved with the Christian group over there that was part of InterVarsity. From that point on, switched majors, became a business major, graduated from that, and then from that point built cell towers for 10 years. Wow. While I was doing that, I was involved with our church, involved with our college ministry, grew from 19 students to over 100 students, went to seminary at night, thought I was going to be a pastor at Moody Theological Seminary, tried being a pastor for 3 years, didn't work. I hired at Moody Bible Institute as special assistant to the president, and then left after about 4 years to start Resource Global.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for that incredible background. Certainly, I didn't have the experience of going through what you did as a child, but I will say, having lived in Japan in 2014 and 2015, I know in a country that has 95% of the people being Japanese, what it's like to live as a minority. And I found that to be a foundational experience in my adulthood and for my 4 kids who are with me, foundational for them and how they view the world and the things around them. So I can definitely appreciate being in a place that's different. Like you, I picked up a lot of skills in youth group as a child. I didn't have other people forcing it on me. My parents were definitely leading me in that direction. And one Sunday when I didn't show up, I got named president. Taught me to always be there after that. So I definitely did a little bit of leadership within my youth group as well. So thank you for sharing all that. I know we have an incredible connection in Wheaton. My son is a football player there. And so you in Chicago, only 45 minutes west over to Wheaton. What a beautiful place that is, and truly different than downtown Chicago, but a great place for Christian activity and raising up the future leaders of the church. And so I'm glad to hear about that. But that's a wonderful journey that obviously took quite a few turns that you may not have expected. And hearing that at one point you wanted to be a doctor, you changed, you headed to be a minister, and now you're running a ministry. Just talk about God's leading in your life, and what were the paths that you stood to, and when was the road less traveled the one you chose, and how did God lead you on some of those directional places? Because I think for a lot of men in our audience, we have looked in the rearview mirror at some of the choices we've made, but we also stand looking at the road ahead and are trying to figure out and navigate where God is leading us.
Yeah. Paul, I would probably say, and I say to a lot of different people, you never know. There are defining moments in each one of our lives. You never know when those defining moments come. And those defining moments, whatever decision you make or you don't make, literally changes the trajectory of your life. But it's not like God saying, all right, here it comes. Here comes this defining moment. Whatever decision you make, here it goes. We just don't know. So the one thing I've realized is, are you faithful to where God has placed you right now? You're praying for open doors. You're praying for closed doors. But are you faithful to where God has placed you right now? For instance, Paul, is when I graduated from WashU, my first job was a company called American Tower. And it built cell towers and all of that stuff. I had no engineering degree. I had nothing. And so the first job I had was just a person at the bottom of the totem pole. We acquired 200 towers from Verizon Wireless. And Paul, they said, your first job for the next 5-6 months is to organize all those files because we have no order in all those files.
Wow.
And I'm sitting there, I'm a college graduate, all right? Go find an intern to do it. But one of the things I was convicted, Lord, can I be faithful to where you've placed me right now? One of the things I didn't realize, Paul, he was setting the stage and building a foundation of learning how to spot detail, learning how to be organized, learning how to put things in order. To this day, it created me the discipline for how I am organized to this day. You never know how God is using those moments to prepare you for something else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just on a complete rabbit hole here, as a law student, I was working a summer internship and had to work on pole attachments for cell phones in the 1997 Telecommunications Act. And I can tell you by the end of the summer, I was sick of pole attachments. Now, we all can't live without cell service today, so I'm certainly not bitter. But I do know a little bit more about building cell towers than the average person.
Yes.
So I can definitely appreciate what you had to go through and the reality that that infrastructure was being built at a time that was really visionary in some ways ahead of things. And so I bet your first job did teach you a lot of things, and at the same time giving you those kind of skills to look at details. I mean, that's something coming out of undergraduate that is a great thing to prepare you for the future.
Paul, don't you think, let's look at the story of David. Young David was a shepherd boy. Mm-hmm. God used that moment. Monotony, boring. He's by himself. But before he could lead the kingdom of Israel, he had to learn to lead a small little flock.
Well, that's a great analogy. I absolutely love that. I frankly know that story backwards and forwards, and yet I haven't thought of it in that direction. I always thought that the shepherd analogy of him being out and leading his flock really was all about that parallel between himself and what Jesus would become. Yeah. But it's great to think about that from a leadership perspective, and also doing, kind of spending his time And frankly, one of the things that I see in the generation that's growing up today, especially in this kind of TikTok world of instant gratification and also kind of believing that they can be social media influencers overnight, people just don't want to put in the years sometimes it takes. I mean, there's story after story in the Bible of promises God made that were not for 30, 40, 50 years fulfilled. Even traveling through the desert for all of the Jewish people for, hundreds of years. And so I just am at a place where I say patience is something that is developed over time and sometimes some hard work. And so thank you for pointing that out. And, I hope to have patience myself, but sometimes having those long-term goals, we all want them to come to fruition faster than they do.
Oh, Nehemiah, I mean, if you look at the book of Nehemiah, he was cupbearer to the king, but it was until later in life, probably in his 60s, that he had a burden for rebuilding the walls. But he did such a good job as cupbearer to the king. The very boss, the king, who did not want to rebuild the walls early on, was the one who gave him all the papers, the supplies, the money, the time off. Why? All because he was such a good employee.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is a great story. I mean, I also, think about Joseph, who for all those years was put in a position to do different levels of service and things that finally led him to the apex of being able to make the decisions about all of the country and the food supplies and all the vision that he had. So
Yeah.
great stories and parallels. So let's kind of shift for a moment and just talk about, the idea and concept that Christianity in the workplace is something that has been a burden on your heart and allowed you to go out and create Resource Global. Talk a little bit about the foundations of that and kind of where your vision started, and do you feel like it's still there today or has it pivoted?
I'm 47 years old. When I graduated in 1999 from Washington University in St. Louis, I was told by different people that as a Christian in the workplace, you put your Bible on your desk, you put verses on your wall, you play Christian music in your cubicle. And I'm sitting there, that's it? Yeah, and serve your church and donate to the church. There was something that was missing in there. When I went to seminary, a lot of times the professor would sit there and says, your role as pastors to equate your marketplace leaders is to preach Christ in the workplace. And I'm sorry, but what about doing a good job? What about doing all these things? No, it's to preach Christ in the workplace. So it didn't sit well with me. Then I met a guy, and during my work with City to City, a guy by the name of Tim Keller, who talked about this whole idea of what if God had called you to be an engineer? What if God had called you to be in the area of finance or a doctor or a teacher? How do you take that calling? Because you're not called to be a pastor or a missionary or full-time ministry or anything like that. To take the skills and calling to renew your city and to create a gospel ecosystem. To say, that made sense. Yeah. Combine that, Paul, with, in some sense, a lot of times during my experience with the Urbana leadership team for the Urbana Missions Conference in Lausanne, I started seeing the rise of the economies are growing. And now there's all these young marketplace leaders going from studying in the U.S. and now going back home. They're your future philanthropists. They're your future leaders in the cities. What if you help them understand that whole integration of faith and work? And will they be able to change the city as your future donors, philanthropists, leaders, business owners in your city? And that became the genesis of Resource Global.
That's outstanding. Now, I love that vision. I love the fact that you bucked the trend of just saying we're going to plaster it on the walls and in the sounds and on ourselves. Because I don't think in corporate America today that it begins with that any longer. I think in many ways we have to wear that badge on ourselves in how we show up, in the decisions that we make, and in the effort that we put forth. I mean, the parable of the talents, right? Those that buried it weren't rewarded, and those that went out and did it for God with the skills and the abilities they had were richly rewarded. And that just jumps forth to me in this moment as kind of how you need to live and to do it the right way and the honorable way within the business context today.
Yeah. And Paul, I hope for all the men that are listening and all the people that Redeem is getting to work with, will you live your life with excellence? Every single day, you put in your best, not because you're wanting a job promotion, but because the gospel allows you, through the example of Jesus Christ, to live your life with excellence. And every single day, we give you that excellence. But along the way, and I love what you guys are doing, your organization. What is in your heart? What is driving you? Is it God's love and the grace you experience, or is it jealousy or guilt or anger or something? Because what is inside of you will eventually come out. So how do we continue to be the best worker, the best individual we possibly could be through God's help? But what are the reasons why we're doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my experience in the workplace, there are a few characteristics that really drive people towards you and to be successful with you. One is, obviously success. I mean, those people who continue to perform well are attracted to other people that want to perform well. At the same time, there's also this sense of optimism and inner joy that we know the Christian faith can bring to everyone, especially when they have the perspective of, kind of Jesus and the blessings upon that God has put upon their lives. And so I just think that, to your point, being excellent every day leads to success. Being excellent every day leads to, I think, a level of excitement and optimism that attracts other people around you. And so talk for a moment about the combination of leadership and success and how that influences those around you in the workplace to potentially have the opportunity to share the gospel with people or to kind of exhibit what the gospel is to others.
Paul, I'll share this to you in one story. In some sense, I learned this well. I was on the call with Sprint one time, and my vice president of the region walks in, and Sprint says to me, "Can you build 20 cell towers or 40 cell towers during this period of time?" I said, "I won't be able to." The vice president sits there, and he tells Sprint, "I'm going to mute you," and he says to me, "Tommy, can you do it?" I said, "I will try my best." Paul, here's the lesson I learned. He says, "I did not hire you to do your best. I hire you to get the job done. If you can't get the job done, I will fire you and replace you with someone else." Fast forward a year later, that same guy named me Employee of the Year. And he
Wow.
says to everyone, wherever I go, with all the clients that I meet and everything like that, everyone says, "If Tommy Lee's on a project, we will give you the business." And he says to everyone, on Fridays, all of us go drinking, all of us go out, but this guy goes to his youth group. I don't follow Jesus, but if this is what it means to follow Jesus, then sign me up.
Wow.
Later on, Paul, 3 people show up. One person who had 3 miscarriages, and she says to me, "How do you find hope? Because I've had 3 miscarriages. I don't know what to do." Second one says, "Tommy, I go to bars all the time. I don't understand purpose. Can you help me? Talk to me about purpose." The third one was my boss, who says, "Tommy, my daughter has been diagnosed with a heart issue. Can you stay after work? And can you pray for my daughter?" And during Christmas, I would give everyone a Bible with their name on it. And later on, 10 years later, when I had cancer, I had 3 Facebook messages. One was that girl who says to me, who had the miscarriages, "Tommy, I have 3 girls now. I came to know the Lord, and I lead the VBS in our church." The other one says, who went to the bars, "Tommy, I got married. My wife makes me go to church and bring your Bible." And the third one was the wife of my former boss, who says, "Hey, Tommy, he has cancer just like you. We're seeing it on Facebook. But he has your Bible right on his countertop. Can you call him and pray for him?" You never know. It's your job. It's how well you do your job that lays the foundation for everything you're doing.
And I truly believe it's from the first impression that you make. And so many people don't realize that. While things can be recoverable, the moment you walk in the room, the moment you start a project or set things out, just like you with that first big project, you set a tone for the future of Tommy Lee in that organization. And what a wonderful thing that your boss stepped in and almost rewarded you with the accolades that frankly you deserved, but also that then set the tone among everybody else in the organization that you were the guy to deliver. Now I have to ask, did you get all 40 polls in place?
I stayed until 9 to 10 every single day, and then I got into work before 7:30 every day.
Wow. Those are some long, hard hours. as somebody who has a son graduating from college this year, I have told him that, the reality of sleeping at his desk or under his desk can be a couple of year thing that is part of kind of the hard work in life that, you put in early in a career. And so I really hope for him that he's able to learn some of those hard lessons that you've learned that I think set character in place for the remainder of your life.
Yeah, I've been reading a book, The Life of Harry Truman, but one of them talks about Secretary of State George Marshall. And there was this one quote that he loved. He always said to the people who work for him, "Men, I wake up every day and I motivate myself. I expect you to do the same thing." And I love it.
I love the story where, Pat Summitt's son, even though she was a leader, a dynamic leader of the Tennessee women's basketball program, had the opportunity to be with her. And she told me the story about her son not making the basketball team. And he came home devastated, and his mom looked at him and said, "Did you actually put in the very best you could have?" And he said, "Well, I didn't." He said, "But Mom, will you help me? Will you teach me?" And she said, "Yes, but only if you bring the motivation. You have to be the one to get up every day. You have to be the one who's going to make the commitment." And she said he completely did. And of course, he then made the team. And so it was a great story of rewarding people with riches when they put forth that effort, and it comes from within, just like you're talking about Harry Truman.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Let's talk about Resource Global. What an exciting thing to be able to bring in cities around the world, as I understand it, this idea of leadership in Christianity in the workplace. Talk a little bit about, being in different countries, being in different places. How does that message translate? Do you feel like it's somewhat uniform? Do you feel like it's very different in things like Eastern versus Western philosophy? It'd be great to kind of hear the gamut of how you lead in different places.
We literally started in Jakarta, Indonesia, and we started working with Chinese Indonesian in a city where it's the fourth biggest population in all of the world, 13,000 islands. Jakarta, Indonesia, which is 13 million people. The Chinese Indonesians make up 20% of the population, but 80% of the economy. For us, how do you influence the people in power that allows it? So it's an 8-month program. We meet every single month. We talk about gospel-centered identity, calling, mission, leadership, faith, and work, all of those things, very general topics. They're paired up with a mentor, and then from that point, they work at the end of it on a gospel action plan. When you look upon your city, what bothers you? What are the problems that you see in the city? In light of your strength, your weaknesses, your talents, all of that, how do you take all of that to change your city? What started from Jakarta, Indonesia, went to Nairobi, Kuala Lumpur, Cluj, Pretoria, South Johannesburg, all of those things. But if you ask me, so Tommy, what's the curriculum? All of them are still gospel-centered identity, calling. Wow, it's so general. Yes, because then we have local city directors who are then able to take it and contextualize. Here's what we're going to talk about: leadership in the Kenyan context, in the South African context, in the Indonesian context. So we have to find leaders that are able to have a good biblical framework, theological framework, understand our culture, and understand the needs of the young people. And now we're doing all these things. And so, for instance, you have Chinese Indonesians who have grown up with everything. They have their own drivers, they have their own nannies, they have their own cooks. How do you contextualize leadership? What does it mean when God says no to them? What does it mean when humility plays a role in it? Or the Kenyans, where they feel like my work as an engineer or in business is secondary to my role of one day I will be a pastor. That's the higher calling. But then how do you address that? And then how, when everyone gets together, how do you get all the cultures learning to communicate with each other?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Just to hone in a little bit here, the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, it doesn't surprise me that it applies in Indonesia and specifically in Jakarta.
Yeah.
But what isn't talked about in there is the reality that Indonesia is the largest Muslim country on earth. And so for some of our people out there who are saying, well, how do you, overcome things in work? Well, by focusing in on the Chinese in Indonesia, you were able to go and create growth in an area that, despite the Muslim influence and the way the government focuses on that, that you were able to bring Christianity to it. Talk a little bit about having to fight that trend and how you were successful among what many people might have not been willing to even start.
If you walked in because you're an older American man, I'm the older Chinese guy from America. As soon as you walk in, they'll immediately say, Tommy, tell us what to do. Paul, tell us what to do. Very respectful, honoring. Now you have to sit there and say, my goal is to help them to think. They have to create ownership of it. I can sit there and tell them what to do all day. It'll never solve the problem. So from the beginning, it was painting the vision. We want men and women in the corporate world to be the leaders, to represent your families, your churches, your community. That's going to involve your time, your service, but your money. And so we're going to do all these things, and we're going to talk about the heart. We're going to talk about what drives you. We're going to talk about what it means to lead in an area where you have power over those who are not Chinese. What does it mean to serve those guys well? Here we are 10 years later. Some of our first cohort, they have to apply to be part of the cohort. We accept 15. Those first group are now our current teachers, mentors, board members, donors. And now, a lot of times, they started giving collaborative, where they sit there and talk about how their philanthropy and their giving could really be able to bless the city. What does it mean for them to change their workplace? But it took time, Paul, to really be able to move from them asking me what they want me to do to say, here's our city, what can we do? And they had ownership in it.
Wow. I mean, that's really amazing. I mean, obviously, you're picking people who have the capacity, the capability, and most of all, the willingness to go and actually go along that journey and then ultimately become leaders and successful people who can influence in the community. Talk a little bit about the depth of your criteria. I mean, how do you pick that? Because, you know, I've been in businesses where we recruit people, and sometimes it's very hard to look at a person and say, what is their internal fortitude? What is their willingness to go above and beyond, despite what's on the resume? And so for a lot of our people out there, they're excited to do it. They may have concerns about whether they have the experience to do it, but yet what you're talking about is going out and really overcoming no matter what and having that profound influence at the end of it.
Yeah, one of the things that's very, I mean, you don't fill out application, I'll hear their story and all that stuff, but when I sit down and talk with them, and when our staff sits down and talks with them, how are they, what's their motivation level? What's their purpose? Do I just want to lead, work just to get more money? But is the greater purpose continue to glorify and honor God through what I do? And then also, are you good at learning how to reflect? What has God been doing in your life? How have you been seeing him work? How have you been able to pursue him in everything that you do? You're not going to be perfect, but those are the criteria. The motivation level is what I'm constantly looking for.
So, as you mentioned, as a Chinese, former Chinese in national, you have a credibility walking into the room with people who look and act like you, or at least look like you, right? But you go to Kenya, and it's an entirely different situation. Talk a little bit about whether you recruited people that looked and felt more like the local, and therefore they had the instant credibility, or were you able to go in and lead in a different way and therefore build the credibility yourself? And if so, how did you go about that?
It was the second one and then eventually the first one. I think a lot of times I had to approach it that, look, I am the American, and I'll probably be paying for most of the salaries for at least a couple years. But I am in your country. I don't know your country. I don't know your culture. I am a student of your city. Help me to learn. Help me to understand. I ask a lot of questions. Paul, have you ever heard a guy by the name of Ray Bakke?
I think I have, yes.
Yeah. Ray passed away, but Ray was this global professor, and he says to me, he used to bring me on trips, and he says, Tommy, always remember that before, when God created time, he created all these cities, and he gave a vision for the cities. He created uniquely the people in those cities. Don't ever think you're too cute where you think you know everything. When you walk in, you have to be a student in the city and the culture. Ask questions and ask yourself, Lord, how can I be part of it? And every single time, that allows the local folks to say, man, this guy wants to learn. Let us help him.
Yeah, I have to say, living in Japan, being a student of their
Yeah,
culture
yeah, yeah.
absolutely led to my success locally.
Yes. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I will say that, one of the things I think Americans sometimes do is that we think we can change culture just because of the freedoms that we have. And so when people go abroad, they tend to unfortunately try to place their beliefs upon the local culture. And
Yes.
as
Yes.
you said, these are cities that were established long, long ago, and the cultures that have been built over a lot longer periods of time around the world than just since 1776 in America. Just how do you encourage people, and then how do you say to them to go about diving into culture in a way that will build credibility for them? Because ultimately, while Jesus bucked some of the system, he also embraced, he bucked the bureaucracy, he bucked the leadership who really and truly were counter to his message, but he fully embraced the culture of everybody else. And so just talk for a minute about how you can do that and how you've seen that be successful.
Look at Zacchaeus, look at the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. In every single situation, he approached them and he spent time with them and he just listened to the simple phrase of, I don't understand your culture. I don't understand your country. Can you teach me? What am I not seeing? What can I learn? And you just sit there and you listen to them. And a lot of times when you start working with them and you're leading them, you're asking them, what would you do in this situation? All of that breaks down all the barriers. One guy, one of our staff workers from Nairobi, we were talking about an issue that he says, Tommy, thank you very much for listening to me because he disagreed with me. Usually people would just say from America, hey, this is what we're going to do. Just do it, implement it. But you asked me, hey, what would you do in this situation? And when I suggested something, you went with it. Thank you very much. And I think a lot of times we just have to do that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, sometimes when you ask that question, you get an answer that you really don't expect,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it resonates with the locals. I mean, I've been fortunate enough in my life to travel many places around the world, and the vast differences in culture can sometimes be little nuances, but can sometimes be giant things that are historical, or they are, recent, or they're a variety of different things. And faith in many places weighs in on that.
yeah,
You've got to not only understand how the culture works, but if you're going to preach the gospel, if you're going to share your faith, you've also got to understand how the bigger picture of religion plays into that and what
yeah.
you're up against sometimes in how they think about religion as a whole.
Yeah. Paul, one of the things I learned is last year I went to Jakarta, Indonesia, and we have an annual Faith and Work conference. When it first started, it was 20 people. This year I walked in, it's over 200 people. They've done a
Wow,
phenomenal job.
that's
Phenomenal.
great.
I brought an American pastor, and he says to me, Tommy, I've been here all weekend. You have not been on the speaking docket. You have not spoken. You're not up front at all. Help me understand why. I said, because they don't need me up front. What they need me is the American president title guy to sit in the audience as the younger men and women lead us, and I sit under their teaching. The very fact that I am now doing that says resonates with everyone. Those guys are leading us, and it gives confidence to both the men and women who always tell you, I can't do it, I can't do it, to have the confidence to lead. That those words by itself will help them more than if I had to be up front all day.
Well, that's servant leadership, right? Not always having to be the one in charge, not always having to be the one getting glorified and taking the attention, but just like Jesus, sometimes leading by serving.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And Paul, I learned this, and I'm not sure if I told you, I had a cancer battle where I have 4 centimeter tumor in my nose. And that 4 centimeter tumor, and now through chemo radiation, has eliminated all my saliva, most of my taste buds, most of my hearing, all my tears. I live in pain every single day. I thought I was going to shut down Resource Global, but it was God who really be able to allow Resource Global to grow. But He reminded me as it continues to grow, don't ever make it about you, because in the early days, remember, you weren't even part of it. You were in chemo and radiation, and this thing grew because of you. Don't ever get so cute to think that it was you who grew this. Always make it about everyone. Tell the stories about the world and the global leaders. Don't ever make it about you. I have never forgotten those words.
Wow, that is powerful. I mean, I think a lot of people in this world think they're not replaceable, but the reality is they are. And God has a beautiful plan, but when things don't go the way that we expect them, sometimes people step in immediately and things change. But Tommy, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. Obviously that sounds like an incredibly difficult situation that you went through with cancer. How are you doing today? And obviously living in pain. We'll certainly pray for you. I'm so sorry to hear for the suffering that you have, but I also immediately thought about Paul and the thorn in his side and some of the things that he suffered with, yet still had an amazing calling by God to do things for him and preach the gospel. And look at the influence 2,000 years later he's still having.
If you look at my eyes, the radiation and chemo destroyed the nerves in my eyes, so it's drooping lower and lower. I can't really hear. I have no saliva. I have no taste buds. I have body chills throughout my body, flu-like symptoms for 6 years that have never gone away, body aches throughout my body every day. And all because of the chemo and radiation. The doctor says I will be stuck with it for the rest of my life. And I have bad days and I have terrible days. But Lord, I don't understand why you put this on me. But this is the situation I am. Can I trust you? Can I mentally trust you that you will sustain me each and every single day, that every day will I die to myself to continue to serve and honor you to the best of my ability because of your grace?
Tommy, I have to admit, whether it was the conversation we had before we started or now, your optimism, your excitement is just palpable. And yet when I hear that, I don't think most people would be in the place you are. And so, how did God breathe that into you? And obviously, you've just said you sustained part of it by, seeking Him and allowing Him to be there for you. But gosh, I think a lot of people in this world would not walk that same path. And yet, how inspirational that you can do both at the same time.
Yeah. When I was a little boy, I struggled with anger and all of those things. I was bullied and ridiculed because of my weight, how smart I am, all of those things. And I became so angry, but it was the grace of God that brought me to where I was. You had this guy who had no social skills, who was scared and always insecure. And somehow you rescued them. You plugged them into all these experiences. And here I am right now. It's like David, where Samuel rescues him. Whispers to him, you're going to be the next king. He gave him a vision. God gave me a vision. And for some odd reason, these are the visions. The cancer and all that stuff I'm stuck with. But how can I still continue to be really serving and dying to myself every day to serve the people around me?
Wow. Well, that's a wonderful and inspiring way to look at things. Obviously, your first podcast is around leadership. And so, in many ways, what you're talking about is leading. And so, talk for a minute about that podcast, how you got to that place, what you as a podcaster enjoy focusing on and help bring relevance to the audience. And just talk a little bit about that and how ultimately it's interwoven with
Yep.
Resource Global.
No, thank you very much. It's called Up Next. And literally, it's what my seminary professor told me for many years when I was graduating from seminary. He says to me, Dr. Julius Waloy Singh, Tommy, you're very good at going, doing. You know what I'm concerned about? You don't reflect. I am very concerned you do not stop and reflect. If you do not reflect upon what God has been doing, good and bad in your life, you will truly never understand what God is asking you to do. So up next, really, and Paul, I would love for you to jump on. It is literally about journey. How have we been seeing God's journey throughout our life, the good and bad? Because even for you, a lot of times, for some reason, you still remember that summer when you had to put together polls. That memory still stays with you. What are the memories or points in our life that God stays with us, that has shaped us? They're defining moments in our life that has helped us become the person we are today.
Tommy, I have to admit to you, I ran so hard for the majority of my younger years,
Yeah.
outrunning
Yeah.
not having to reflect on what my life was and doing,
Yeah.
just to try to turn off the voices in my head, because I'd made a lot of bad choices. I'd done a lot of the wrong things that I didn't like reflecting, because it forced me to face things. And
Yes.
I think for some of the people in our audience, especially those people who've dealt with a lot of life's difficulties, reflecting is not meant to be shameful.
Yes.
Reflecting is not meant to produce enormous guilt. It's really meant to see God interwoven in what's happened and allowing us the opportunity to make decisions going forward that we learn. I mean, history's doomed to repeat itself, especially when people don't understand it. And that's true not only in the broader context, but in our individual lives.
Because if you don't reflect, what is inside of you will eventually come out. And it will come out with how you parent, how you treat your spouse, how you treat your kids. So you better start reflecting, or it will have ramifications you will never have imagined.
Yeah, I had a whole lot come out sideways in my life. And so, reflecting in recent years has been a huge component of how I think I've started to really grow spiritually and do things different in my life. And so I appreciate your words there, and I can definitely empathize with that situation.
And I bet you, if we dive into it, the reason why you started to redeem was because of some of the decisions, mistakes, things that you did that prepared, because you don't want people to deal with what you had to deal with.
Absolutely. I mean, 100% that's true. And then the other factor for me, and this goes back to community that we're building and leadership too, I felt like I had access to resources that some people just don't. A lot of people don't. People who invested in me that didn't have to, and some of which, were just wonderful people that wanted to give their time to help me find a very different path. And the reality is, I wanted to bring those same resources to people everywhere.
Yeah.
And so part of our building a community, part of our helping men go through this, opportunity to learn from some of the teachings and curriculum and things that we're putting together at the Redeemed, was about giving back and also helping people move forward. Yeah, of course, we all want people to avoid the pitfalls that we've seen in life and to tell those stories. And I certainly welcome, Tommy, the opportunity to tell a little bit more of my story with you. And so maybe at some point we can certainly make that happen.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah.
What in your mind is kind of the one or two leadership characteristics that you try to bring out on your podcast or talk to leaders about that makes that big difference? I mean, if we were to list the characteristics of a good leader, it would probably run the depth of a page. But in your view, as somebody who really studies leadership, what are those 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, things that you think really separate the good leaders from the great leaders, and really therefore the opportunity to have a profound influence on the kingdom versus just being a participatory person in the kingdom?
The key thing for me always, it's not about you. Your job is to help people see what their potential is. So how I manage people is different from every single person based upon how they're wired. Some people need to be encouraged. Some people need to be pushed. Some people need time, whatever it is. But in all situations is to have them think, to have ownership. Whatever I could do, I inspire. My goal is to give you a vision of yourself, give you feedback, encourage you, all those things, but it's never about me. It's about seeing you realize who God has created you to be so you can make a difference for the gospel. And if I can do that in every job that I do, I am always working who can replace me, how can I get those guys to become the best versions of themselves.
When I first went into sales, and I am going to come back around to your point, when I first went into sales, one of the first things I was taught was to ask a whole lot more questions than I did kind of pushing my own points of view. And what I'm ultimately hearing from you in that comment is listening and placing yourself second is such a quintessential part of that. Learning what other people want and need, and therefore helping them see a vision of themselves. Because the reality is, all of us are not motivated by the same thing. I mean, I loved certain things around achieving rewards. I had a business partner early in my career. He told me that he kept the rewards in the attic, and when the box filled up, he threw them away and got another box. To him, the accolades didn't matter, but seeing the people develop was a big part of it as a former coach. So I love how all of us kind of come from a unique perspective that God gives us. Yet at the same time, if you don't understand that in a person, you're trying to motivate everybody as a one-trick pony, and that doesn't, it may work with a few, but it doesn't work with the broader audience.
And wouldn't you say in leadership, that means sometimes when you're watching a person fail, you just kind of let them fail because they had to work out the kinks through some of those things in order for them to learn.
Yeah, early in my career, I wanted to rescue everybody, or I wanted to push them out of the way and just fix it. And the reality is that you're in a marathon, not a sprint. And so helping people achieve what they need to achieve to learn the lessons they need to learn, and really asking God, do you want me to use the skills you've given me to intervene here and to give somebody a lifeline? Or at the same time, is part of your vision this person learn something from this, and that I'm interfering with your growth by jumping in and saving them?
Correct. No, thank you.
Well, listen, I'm so excited about what you're doing. I'm a big globalist. That may be a little counter to what's going on in the world right at this moment. But the reality is, I think that cultures around the world teach us a profound thing about each other, about ourselves. And I think it's all developed very uniquely. These are all children of God, whether they've had the opportunity to hear the gospel or not. And we have to really bring it to them in a unique way. And, let's be honest, we all look for leadership. We all look at leaders, and especially leaders who are God-breathed.
Yeah. And my hope,
Go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
And my hope at Resource Global is that as these young leaders grow, these future philanthropists, leaders of their cities, we're going to decrease dependence on Western funding, because as the cities grows, these are your leaders. These are your future leaders who will carry your cities. And as they continue to grow, you will change the whole dynamics of global missions as we see it.
I love that. I love the idea that every country has the opportunity to do that in and of itself. There are obviously hurdles in some places, like corruption and other things that the enemy brings, that are terrible things for people to have to overcome. There's history, there's all kinds of stuff. Having spent some time and truly loving the Cambodian people myself, that was one of the atrocities in my lifetime, where you had 25% of the population be exterminated. And it's hard to believe in modern times that's even possible. Yet that's some of the happiest people I've ever met. And so to me, going to Cambodia was one of the most inspirational places on earth, because how could people that have suffered the way they did have the perspective in life that they do? And then how can I then wake up as an American and complain about something?
Correct.
The perspective you get going globally of how blessed we are as Americans for the freedom, for the opportunity, honestly, all of us live like kings compared to many places around the world, irrelevant to where you are in kind of the hierarchy of things here in America. And so, this is a beautiful place and a blessing in and of itself. And that's certainly something I've learned in my travels, and I'm sure your leaders can represent and know. And then I think leaders from within are so powerful and probably greater than any of us can be from the outside.
Yeah. Paul, one last thing on my end is, you talked about living in Tokyo. It was always Americans and Koreans, from what they tell me, who lived in Tokyo. But now many of the Koreans are staying in Seoul, Korea. Americans are not going there as much anymore. Who have they replaced them with? Vietnamese and Brazilians. If I go to Sao Paulo, Brazil, there's a huge Japanese community. Globalization changes the makeup of how we do ministry and what we see happening.
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. The largest population of any place in the world outside the country of Japan is Sao Paulo. And
Yep.
so most people don't expect to go there and find
Yep.
4 million Japanese,
Yes.
maybe 5 million now, living in one of the most bustling cities in the
Uh-huh.
world. They especially find it interesting that they speak the local language, that they have the local accent, but yes, they've held on in many ways to their Japanese culture. And so
Hmm.
it's this fascinating
Yes.
blending that happens there. I loved Sao Paulo. What a great and interesting city. And I also loved living in Japan. They're not the same, but they are
Yeah.
beautiful in and of themselves.
Yeah.
You're right about Seoul, Korea. I mean, what you've seen in the evolution of that country in South Korea is it's gone from, much like a lot of East Asian nations, from once being a producer of very cheap, very not high quality made products, to now making and being on the leading and cutting edge of what's happening in the world. And so what once pulled the best South Koreans to other countries in the world is now keeping them
Yes.
in their own country. And, even now, Seoul is becoming one of the hot spots of the world for travel because everybody wants to go learn from winners.
Yeah.
And, let's be honest, Bora Bora is going to draw people to it every world because of the natural beauty that God gave it. But the leadership beauty that countries begin to have that are thriving and successful is really something that draws people to it to see it. And I think that's exactly what South Korea is seeing. I was able to go there the first time when I was 10 years old. And at that point, the largest Christian church in the world was in Seoul. And I remember sitting in the pews, and it was so broad to me to see a global church for the first time. You sat in the section and wore an earpiece based on your ability to hear in local language or your language, your native tongue, what was actually being spoken in Korean from the pulpit. And gosh, that was maybe one of the first eye-opening experiences I had in how God was making his way in a global world.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. 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 Yeah.
All right, we got to shift now. As I mentioned to you before, my three boys and I play fantasy football. It's a super big love in our family. They also all play in 12-man leagues, but I'm focused really on playing with them. Thank goodness I'm the reigning champion this year, so I don't have to get a whole lot of grief from my boys. But you've got a podcast on fantasy football. I'd love to hear about it. And then I want to hear how, in many ways, leadership and football are tied together and how you play the interwovenness of that into each other.
Yeah, I think a lot of times I love stats. And Paul, if there's anything I could do on my free time, I sit there and look at all my stats. I use AI to help me think through all the stats, all of those things. And so for me, a lot of times, don't ever go for the quarterbacks. There's so many different, unless for some reason Josh Allen starts dropping in the fourth or fifth round, or Lamar Jackson one time dropped in the sixth round. Then go snag them up. Other than that, make sure you get your running backs, wide receivers. There's always a lot of wide receivers, but running backs are my key as well too. But yet at the same time, you have Jahmyr Gibbs or something like that, or you have some of the stud wide receivers. So those are ones I would say target in the early rounds.
All right, so who's your first round choice going into 2025, or who are your few first round choices?
You got to look at Justin Jefferson. You got to look at Jamar Chase, but you got to look at Jahmyr Gibbs. I tend to avoid all of the injury-prone guys. Tyreek Hill, I tend to avoid. Christian McCaffrey, I tend to avoid. Saquon Barkley surprised me. I thought he would go in the second round. He got picked. I said, oh, yeah, he's always injury-prone. But the offensive line of the Philadelphia Eagles made it so good where he was excellent at what he does.
A lot people have different philosophies. Some try to get a team of people where everyone is on a different NFL team. Other people, concentrate and have maybe half the NFL teams not represented on their team. I think sometimes that's about success and the belief that certain teams are going to be successful, but that doesn't always add up to statistics. So talk a moment about kind of how you look for value and people who are succeeding. And there's a little parallel to that about nations around the world, and that you may not be the first tier, but still great things are happening.
Yeah, for me, a lot of times I tend to try to find all the best players, all the value guys, people who are because I want to trade. Paul, I am all about trading. So at the end of the year, my team is not going to be my team. And so because I want trade chips. And so a lot of times I'm willing to put those guys who are injured and all that other stuff. I'm trading for players early on that have high potential but injured because once, even if I get into the barely get into the playoffs, but I have an all-star team of those who are now healthy. That's all I care about. So I don't look to be the best record. I just look to have the best team, and whatever I could do to trade those, I will do it.
And the other thing that factors in for me is choosing players off of the ultimately best teams, the Chiefs, the Bills, others. They don't necessarily play the weeks, they don't play well the weeks that you are playing in the playoffs in fantasy football. And so you have to think about those teams that are going to be scratching and fighting for that playoff spot and therefore keeping their best players in the games week 16 and 17, 18, whereas the Chiefs maybe on week 18 are pulling their best players early to get prepared for the playoffs.
Yeah. Or even the teams that are always coming behind because their defense stinks. And so they're always airing out the ball. So you don't want their running back, but you also want their wide receivers.
Yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, I've always been a big college football fan. And to some extent, I like pro football. But my allegiance to any one team has been dramatically changed by fantasy football.
Yeah.
The advent of Red Zone, which, by the way, is the ADD person's ultimate dream. To watch it, and my son has a whole group of boys that come over every Sunday, and we watch it. It's exciting, and yet I question and would wonder what you think. Even though the NFL is exploding in growth, how much of it is the idea that we're shifting over to a player environment versus a team environment?
Especially with sports betting and also with fantasy. It has completely changed the landscape because you don't want to sit there and watch one game with all these commercials. You want to go from highlight to highlight, all of these different things. That's why a lot of times you look at these YouTube or cartoons and all that stuff with kids. They're no longer 30 minutes from when we were younger. They're more now 15 minutes and even 5-minute shorts.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember. And when I was dealing with national advertising, we were quickly seeing that the only real remaining place to advertise that people actually watch television was live sports. And here we are now seeing live sports even moving away from commercials. And so I think advertisers globally are struggling to get through traditional channels people's attention in any significant way. And so, here we are, we have a sport that brands are trying to nuzzle up around, and yet at the same time, we're more distracted than ever. I don't know about you, but I have a minimum of 2, if not 3 devices between the television, my cell phone, and maybe even a computer, all running at the same time. So getting my attention is very difficult until my player is breaking it down the left sideline and I have full focus on how many yards he's going to get.
Oh, even like this weekend, I was sitting there watching the Duke game because I have come to love Cooper Flagg, Proctor, all of those guys. But yeah, I'm also watching an NBA game as well, too.
Yeah. Well, as a lover of Duke basketball, I can tell you this has been an amazing ride. And whether we beat Houston in the winner of the Auburn-Florida game this coming up Saturday and Monday, I don't know. But I will tell you that Cooper Flagg has been dynamic and has truly helped change, once again, people's perceptions of Duke. I love him, and I hate we got him for only 1 year, but his star is shining bright, and he will have to move on, I think.
I was disappointed they're playing Houston. I was hoping it would play for Florida, and that Auburn will battle against Houston. We'll get the winner of that. Yeah. But I love Auburn. I think it's going to be Duke and Auburn. Broome is so good, but Flagg is excellent. I am so hoping he ends up in the Spurs. I am so hoping he would go to the Spurs.
Well, that's awesome. San Antonio will get a great view of him this coming weekend, and maybe that will be the player that he ends up with. Well, Tommy, this has been a phenomenal opportunity. I just thank you so much. As we close, I just ask you one last question. Is there any little nugget of leadership that you would say you want to give to our audience, or that you think is one of those things that pushes people over the top as leaders before we go?
Be fast to give credit when people succeed. Always talk about the team. Talk about when things go well. Talk about the team. When things go bad, you're the leader. You stand up and you take the hits. Guys, that was my decision. That's my team. Sorry, I made a mistake. And so you take the hits. You never throw anyone under the bus. But when there's time to give credit, you give it to the team.
I love it. Seen it happen, experienced it, and always thought more of leaders when they do that. Ladies and gentlemen who are listening to the show, to our audience, I thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Tommy Lee today. I think you can understand why we have him on the show, and I hope this is opportunity for you to learn and to experience, and hopefully to take some of this and go out and really bring it into the workplace today.
And Paul, I'm very excited. In the summer, I'm going to be leading a book study for the Redeem. I'm going to do a men's small group on Every Great Endeavor by Catherine Leary Ellsworth and Tim Keller.
Oh, awesome. Well, for those of you that want to learn about that or any of our other opportunities, please go to theredeem.com, sign up for our newsletter. I know newsletters sometimes seem old school, but it is the best way to get the broadest and most relevant information. We have phenomenal stuff on our website. Our podcast is just one of many venues. Ultimately, folks, what we want to see is people join small groups, because getting into community with other men, going beyond news, sports, and weather to true faith and walking life with other men is what I believe God intended for us to do all along. And so I thank you for your time. I wish you the best of luck. Good night and Godspeed.